Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Med School Minutes podcast, where we discuss what it takes to attend and successfully complete a medical program. This show is brought to you by St. James School of Medicine. Here is your host, Kaushik Gua.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Med School Minutes, where we talk about everything MD related with a focus on international students, specifically Caribbean students. Today we have a very special guest. He's only 18 years old. His name is Om, and he's one of the members of our inaugural pre-med class. And he's here to give us some insight into what it's like to come all the way from India to St. Vincent, which is obviously dramatically different, but maybe not so much. So without further ado, let's invite Om. Why don't you just give us a little bit of a background about yourself?
So, my name is Om. I'm 18 years old, and I've directly come from India for the pre-med program at St. James. Why I chose medicine, there's a whole story behind it. So, in fourth grade, I had a field trip to one of the government hospitals from my school. And if you look at government hospitals generally in India, they're full of patients because they provide free healthcare. So it's really, really hard for doctors to cope up in that environment and take care of so many patients at the amount of speed that they're doing. So that inspired me a lot. And I know it's a very cliche thing to say that I want to help everyone in the future and I want to do good for the society. But alongside that, looking at the amount of pressure that they handled, and yet they came out so well with all of the solutions for all of the patients, that really inspired me a lot. And that made me wonder that if medicine is one of the best professions out there, alongside that, in the end, of course, you're helping a lot. You're helping your society. You're giving back to the society as well. And as an Indian, that's one thing that we learn in our cultural values, that you do give back to the society in any way you can. Okay. So I thought that I do with my profession. I become a doctor and give back to the society.
Okay. Well, that's awesome.
Why I chose the Caribbean? So I did get into a lot of medical schools in Europe specifically, and even in the UK. One of them being Brunel and one of them being Unicameral in Italy. However, when I did research upon what happens after you get your degree, which is basically MBBS outside of India, or let's say in India, you basically end up taking the step 1 and step 2 or the USMLE license examinations, regardless of wherever you study. Okay. So looking into that, I saw that there's a lot of the cost-benefit ratio as well, because there's an X amount of money I'm paying in the UK and in Europe, which if I pay in the Caribbean, I'm getting it done quickly. I'm getting it done faster as well. And of course, I get to take the step 1 in the end. So if I look at it in the standpoint view of how much time it takes me, 6 years in the UK, then 2 years to prepare for the licensing examinations. And 2 years after that, I will go for my super specialty. And then that's when I get my license to practice medicine. But if I look at it in the standpoint of the Caribbean, 5 years for the MD course at St. James, after which 3 years for any basic residency. And if I do want to go further, then of course it takes more time. But then if you look at the average, it's 8 years compared to it being at least 10 to 12 years in Europe or the UK. So I'm saving on 4 years. I'm saving on my money as well, my time as well. And I'm also getting the same quality of education and taking the licensing exam that I'm supposed to be taking.
You mentioned that you looked into Europe. And after Europe, you were thinking, or at least the schools are telling you to do USMLE. But, and again, I don't necessarily know much about the Europe or the European system, but I know for a fact that they do not follow the USMLE. The European schools do not teach towards USMLE. How do they expect their students to pass that test?
So a lot of European schools that you're mentioning right now are the old public universities that have been there since the past 200, 300 years. And they do not teach us in English. They teach us in their language that they have, the local language. However, the private universities that have upcome right now in the past 4 or 5 years. So a lot of them, you can see them in Hungary or let's say around Georgia or somewhere, or even Italy, as a matter of fact. Private universities over there, they teach you based on the USMLE curriculum.
I see.
Yeah. So after they make you do the MBBS, which is again a 6-year course. And after which they guide you to take the step 1. And they recommend the step 1 over the local examinations, because the way it works in Europe is that even after you get an MBBS degree, you cannot practice as a doctor. You got to still work for at least 4 years. and after which
Right.
2 years of like your paid internships, and then after you give an exam, you basically get your degree, and you can be licensed to work as a doctor. So if you look at it, it's a cumulative of 12 to 14 years in general as well. So the
Oh,
private
wow.
universities, to cut short the amount of time that they give to students, recommend taking the step one because they find it as an easier route as well. However, if you look at it, again, the curriculum's so new to them that they wouldn't have the amount of infrastructure that's there, or let's say the amount of knowledge to help us learn the step one curriculum.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
And Caribbean med schools
Because,
have been here since a long time as well.
yeah, the first Caribbean school was in 1976, and then 1980. And we've been around for 25 years. This is our 25th anniversary, actually. So we have over 700 graduates practicing medicine in and around the United States. But a lot of these European countries don't speak English. UK is different, obviously, but Hungary, Georgia, they don't. English is. How do you get clinical exposure? Because in the United States, clinicals are a very, very important part of your education. Like, you cannot essentially be licensed without clinicals. But if you cannot communicate in the local language, how are you possibly learning in English? Your entire background is in English. I mean, I'm presuming you studied in an English medium school in India. Your command over English is fantastic. You go to a different country, like say Hungary, where nobody speaks English. The local people definitely don't. How are you getting clinical experience there? I mean, I'm just curious.
So when one of my friends did apply to Hungary, and when she got it, I did ask her these questions as well, like how are you going to cope up with the language barrier over there? So they set up classes for you, and they make sure that you take classes towards the end of the day. So 2 hours every day for the classes, so that you learn the local language, so that you can converse with people over there, and also go out and have conversations, obviously. But to me that sounds really out of the world, because honestly,
Far-fetched.
if I'm gonna invest so much time into learning a new language, I'd rather give that time into studying medicine.
That's so well put. I mean, that's pretty. I mean, I don't know. Even if a school in Hungary were focusing on the PLAB is also in English.
Yeah.
It just baffles me that people are not thinking things through. So, which brings me to, I think, the decision that you made of coming to the Caribbean, because I think the biggest advantage is that the language is the same.
Yeah.
Like, everybody speaks English. Not everybody. English is the official language on a vast majority of the Caribbean countries. And the best part is that the schools are actually catering towards the USMLE. And the other thing is that most of these schools, as you pointed out, not most, I'd say about 6 to 8 schools have been around for over 20 years. So you have a very good pick of schools, very promising results from everybody. However, I will also point out, though, and I don't know if this is an issue in Europe, that so officially on record, there are over 75 plus Caribbean medical schools.
Yeah.
Out of the 75, only about 20 of them are accredited. So that's something that you always have to be very careful of, because
for sure,
if you don't do your research, you can potentially end up in a Caribbean school that has no level of accreditation and no credentialing possible. Now, that's a big, big problem. But that being said, as I mentioned, that there are at least 8 to 10 schools that have been around for 20 plus years. Those are, I mean, I think with eyes closed, they have good reputations. So those are great schools to come to. But tell me a little bit about, so you said you're only 18 now. So first of all, it's a very big step to come. And do you have any friends, family in St. Vincent? Did you know anybody in St. Vincent?
No.
I mean, just from this conversation and just from talking to you, your courage and spirit for pursuing medicine is really unparalleled. going back when I was 18 years old, which was a very, very long time ago, I don't think I could have done what you've done. Taking the leap and coming to a country where you don't know anybody, you don't have any family, and settling down is amazing. I mean, I cannot tell you the admiration I have for you because of that. But can you tell me what your reactions were when you first came, when you, saw St. Vincent and all of that? But what was your reaction like?
So when I first came, I had a flight from Barbados to St. Vincent. So that's when I actually was really scared about the flight because um, it was it was not so like friendly. But then of course I did land safely, and it's nothing like it's not safe. It is safe, but then obviously looking at the plane and the stuff, you don't expect it to be so small. But then it was, and luckily I got all of my luggage as well because I did hear. So I did have a lot of conversations with students where on an island before me. So they did tell me that take care of your luggage, make sure it's always there with you, because it does happen that luggage gets delayed and stuff. But I fortunately didn't face any issues with that. Security going past customs in St. Vincent was very easy because I just had to show them I was a statement, like I was a St. James student, and they didn't say anything, just nodded and they let me go. Um, Olivia came to pick me up, so that was really nice because I landed around 11 p.m. at night. So for her to
Oh,
come out,
wow. That's
yeah,
awesome.
so for her to come out this late and then drop me safely to where I was going to be accommodated, which is here right now, was really nice of the school and for her to do.
Okay.
Um,
So before we go any further, can you describe the plane that you came on?
it was a small jet basically, which I think was manufactured in 1970s or the 80s, and the plane started rattling, and they had a line of at least
Okay.
like three planes, and that's how we like took off. So my luggage was in another plane, and I was in another plane. So that got
Oh,
me
wow.
confused. So I was like, "Will I get my luggage or not?" He's like, "If you're in luck, you will." So
That's funny. And tell me more about Olivia. Who is Olivia? Can you, let's for our audiences, clarify that?
So Olivia is the concierge head over here in
Right.
St. James, and she takes
Right.
care of all of our passports, our visas, and our accommodation and like moving through and for the island. Um, and she's helped me, like, she's taken care of all of our passports, basically getting our visas on time. We have submitted
Got
to
it.
her, she
Got it.
gets all of our visas, and we get them back.
Got it. Awesome. But I will say this about, so the Caribbean, the great thing about the Caribbean is that, and this is something I think should be a takeaway for not just you, I think it should be a takeaway for globally, is that folks in the Caribbean are incredibly optimistic, calm, and they can almost always face any sort of adversity with absolute calm. Like anxiety is something, in my opinion, that I don't necessarily, and I've been doing business in the Caribbean for at least over a decade, and anxiety in the Caribbean, at least from a professional standpoint, really doesn't exist. Like they're so calm and collected. And I hope that, and these are things that when we come into a Caribbean island, we're like, oh, wow, it's not a big plane. It's different, yes, but you also have to see the islands are small, the distances are tiny. This is a great way to make travel cost effective for everybody. And they make the most of what they have. And at the same time, they just do it in a very friendly manner. And I think that says something, because bigger countries like USA, for example, I just think that temperamentally, a lot of folks are not equipped to be able to handle things that happen unexpectedly. And then I think any person in the Caribbean or any person with exposure in the Caribbean is just generally more attuned to that, which I will tie this into medicine, is that you, as a doctor, don't know what you're going to face when a patient comes in. And I think that temperament, if you can absorb that, that cultural value, so to speak, in the Eastern Caribbean, I think that will propel you really, really far in your career.
I mean,
But
it does give
so,
you it gives
yeah,
you
go
a
ahead.
sense
Sorry.
of being calm and being collected in situations where you
Yeah,
don't know what to do in. And a lot
yeah,
of locals are really friendly that way as well. Like if you do have a conversation with them, they're really nice. They do
yeah,
like
yeah,
ask you as well. They're so inquisitive about like where you're from and stuff like that.
yeah.
Like especially my landlord, when I came, she made sure that I was comfortable. She made sure that everything was there perfectly for me. And she did come
Oh
check on me
wow,
for the first few weeks as well. Like if you need something, if you really want to go and run some errands, we can help you out with them as well. So that's
awesome!
one
Wow,
thing I
that's
liked a
amazing.
lot. And even while walking on
Yeah.
the street, this doesn't happen in India specifically, that people don't come and greet you in India. Like if you're walking towards
Okay.
someone, you just nod or you just might look at them and you just walk away. But here in the Caribbean, when you're walking past the street with someone, everyone greets you. Be it good morning, good
Wow.
day, how are you? Just, even if you don't know them, they randomly greet you. So that once when I came, that was something very awkward and weird for me to like get adjusted to because I've never ever been greeted that
Okay.
way in India at least.
Okay.
Because if someone does that in India, you're like an outlier. You're like, why are you doing that? Like that's not supposed to be done. You're not supposed to talk to strangers. But then over here, at least, that sense of humility was really nice. I really loved
Okay.
how people like greeted in the morning and stuff like that. So I learned how to do that as well. I started doing that
Okay.
as well. So that's one thing I
That's
learned over
awesome.
here for sure.
Yeah. It's funny that you point this out because I'm originally from India too. And I came here, 25 years ago. I do remember now that you bring it up that was an aspect that I was like, wait, why are they wishing? Do I know them? Like, why are they
Yeah,
smiling at me? Why? But I will also say that aspect is so gratifying when you go out and a stranger smiles
yeah,
at you and wishes you a good morning or a good day. You're always like, you know what? A stranger just wished me good day. How can I not have a good day now?
yeah.
That's awesome. So, but tell me so obviously you landed in St. Vincent when it was like 11 o'clock at night and it was really dark. But the next day, what was the first thing you did the following day?
The first thing I did was I got myself my SIM card,
Okay.
and I
And was
went to
that easy?
Macy's. Yeah, it was easier. Like they just
I
give
see.
me my passport. So I gave them my passport. They asked me my credentials, like what's your name? They just checked through my passport, like where I live and stuff. And they gave me my SIM card. And then I went to Macy's because I heard that a lot of students were saying that there's not like they don't have all the stuff that you need in the moment. Like once it gets stocked up, you're supposed to go and get it ASAP, or else you're gonna miss out on stuff like olive oil and stuff like that. But luckily, when I went, they had everything, and I'll be honest, prices compared to India, if you're from India, like particularly because the Caribbean has a stronger currency for us, tends to be more expensive because I think one EC right now is currently 31 rupees. Whereas if you compare it to the States, one US dollar is like I think 2.7 or 3 EC. So for the people coming from the States, so like Canada, for them it's easier because the currency is not that strong as theirs. But for us from India, it is a bit tough to manage the monetary part of it because we have a weaker currency. So for me, when I came, I was like everything's so expensive. Like I was like, why is a pound of potato so expensive? Whereas in India, it could be like 3 4 EC, but then I buy it over here, it's like 12 EC. So for me, first adjusting to the whole costing and living cost in the Caribbean was kind of baffling at first for the first few days. But then I realized that if you do manage, you like eventually, of course, because I just came, I didn't know how to manage my money or how much money I got. But after a month or so, I learned how to do that as well. So these are certain things that students are scared of, like leaving your country and going to another country. How will I manage my money? How will I take care of all of my belongings and stuff like that? But I'll tell you one thing honestly, give it a month or so, you'll eventually get through it.
Okay. So one thing I will say though, that Massey is a little more expensive than the rest of the country because it's a organized departmental store, but they have farmers markets every
Yeah,
weekend. And I think if you go there, that gives you a sense of it's very similar to the bazaars in India.
yeah,
A lot of haggling, and you can get things pretty cheap. But that being said, you have to realize that their currency, their lowest denomination of their currency, is 30 times more than the lowest denomination of the
yeah,
Indian currency. So yes, things are a little more expensive. As far as the supply chain issues are concerned, I will tell you that in the United States, we don't have supply chain issues. We do, obviously, during the pandemic, we had a little, but generally speaking, stores are always fully stocked, yada, yada, yada. I haven't been to India in a very long time, but India also has supply chain issues, at least when I was there. If you like something,
okay. Not anymore, not anymore. Now, the thing is that even the local department stores that you have on the street, they have everything that a supermarket has.
Oh, wow.
So that's awesome. In India has become better.
Improved, yeah. But I also think that that's a factor of the size of the country. Like USA is a big country. India is a big country. Caribbean, I mean, I've been to Europe several times, and I've seen the same supply chain issues where essentials seem like they're not available at certain stores. And that's because smaller countries have supply chain constraints. This is just a systemic thing that, you know, your attitude towards this is amazing. Most people will be, what? I came from the United States. I'm so used to having 25 varieties of olive oil and they have only 2. This is a terrible country. But your approach is so level-headed and generally speaking, glass half full, very optimistic. That's wonderful. That's such a good temperament to have. What about the infrastructure and the streets? When you went out, what was your feeling? How does that compare to India?
When I landed, so I'm not sure if you know this, but you know Maruti Suzuki, the brand for vehicles in India, they sell the Swift, right? So that's common. That's one of the most common cars in India. So when I landed, that was the first car I saw outside the street.
Okay.
I was like, okay, I'm back in India anyways. So my first notion was to tell my dad that, okay, they have a lot of Indian vehicles over, like the same make, obviously.
Yeah.
But when it comes to infrastructure, because it's an island, it's very, very different compared to back home. Because you have houses on hilltops and mountains and stuff like that, you can't expect it to be the same. Like the way they design the houses are in such a way that they don't fall off. And I think the cement, or let's say whatever things that they use for building a house, it's way, way different than what we have in India. I think back home or anywhere else in the world, because they got to look at the standpoint where they have to make sure that they face the metric of the Caribbean. Like you got to withstand a lot of high blowing winds. And a lot. So infrastructure, very colorful. I'll say that.
Okay.
People have absurd colors of houses. I saw purple, pink, and I never ever seen like for me, it's always been plain black or plain white, or let's say gray or marble. But then over here they have a lot of colors. So even the house that the accommodation that I live in is called Sky Blue Beach Apartments. So it's literally blue.
Okay.
The whole house is blue.
Okay.
So that's one thing that I did observe. The streets, most part of it's clean. It's very, very nice. They follow traffic rules over here, surprisingly. Not like India where you can just cut through wherever you want and you can walk through whenever you want. People stop for you at the zebra crossing, which they don't in India. You got to walk your own way. Like, you can't wait. Then you can be stuck forever. So a lot of positives as well for the country that I expect India to accustom with in a few years as well, because they've started using a lot of security as well. So these are certain things that I like about the island where the drivers are respectful towards the pedestrians as well.
Right.
They give you the right of way, which is something that I really appreciate, because for me, I've never seen that in India. It's always like you either walk or you don't walk. If you don't want to walk, you're going to be stuck over there for the same amount of time.
Yeah.
So you got to walk by your own self. So that's one good thing over here. The streets, it's all a one-way road basically. So what they call an highway is basically a normal one-way road. So when I heard highway, I thought it was going to be like a proper highway. But then when I saw it, I was like, okay, fair. But it gets you from point A to point B.
Right.
So that's what matters.
Yeah. That's interesting. And has there been any culture shock, so to speak, or things that were like, wait, no, is this how you should be doing it? What's going on?
Everything shuts down at 3:30 or 4 p.m. in Kingston. And
yes,
the local dollar bands that run in the morning, they stop running at 4 p.m., 5 p.m. So one mode of transport that you have, it's basically gone. And I did observe that there's something called a Caribbean time where everyone caters to. So if you're sitting at a restaurant, you cannot expect the food to come out in 30, 45 minutes. You got to give them at least an hour or at least 2 hours.
Yeah,
because that's
that
how
is.
Caribbean time works. They'll take their
Yeah,
time, they'll make you food whenever they want to. You can't argue with
yeah.
them, because if you do end up arguing with them, they'll be like, okay, leave.
Yeah, that is true. But again, I think that that also goes down to the cultural aspect where they're not driven by monetary gain. And I think that that says a lot about, for them, there is something more beyond making money. There is something more that to them, they're like, you know what, I'm going to prepare this food with love and it'll take time. So get prepared to deal with it. What I do like about the Caribbean is that there's no false expectations. You come in, and if you go and ask the waitress how long will you take, she'll
They'll tell it to
openly
us,
tell
yeah.
you.
But
And I
then
love that.
I was here for the break as well, so I didn't go back home.
Mm-hmm.
So during Christmas, I decided to go out on the 24th, the 25th, and 26th.
Yeah.
Those 3 days, I thought they might be having something going on at least. But one thing I observed is in the Caribbean, they take family time very seriously. For them,
Yes.
spending time with their family, spending time with the people they call their own is something that they keep above their businesses as well. So if you're earning
Okay.
money, like I did call a guy because I need a pickup from one place. So I called a
Mm-hmm.
taxi and he's like, I'm with my family right now, I cannot come. And that, even
Okay.
though at that moment I was like, okay, how do I get back home? That's a whole different story. But then the taxi guy, when he said that, I was like, okay, they do prioritize family over everything. So for
Yeah,
them,
that is
hospitality
true.
matters more than earning money, like you said.
Yeah.
They care about giving time to their family, spending time with their loved ones, which is something that you would not see in a very modern world.
Right.
You wouldn't
Yeah.
you wouldn't
No.
see that.
There's just so much of takeaways. Again, having done business in the Caribbean for over 10 years, there's just so many takeaways for me. And just genuinely going to the Caribbean, interacting with the folks there, interacting with the people working there, living there. I think my outlook on life has been changed dramatically for the better.
Yeah.
Um, and it really begins to make you take a step back and think that, okay, what's the purpose of this rat race that we call life? So
Yeah.
I do think that the Caribbean has definitely a very calming influence, which is why I also think that it's one of the biggest tourist destinations in the world,
Yeah. It's so
because
relaxed.
people really enjoy,
Mhm.
people really enjoy that. So now we talked a little bit about St. Vincent, we talked a little bit about you, but again, I have to make this observation that as an 18-year-old, you're very, very fresh as far as years are concerned, but you have a certain amount of gravity and maturity where you seem to have adjusted very well. I mean, what's the reason? What's your secret?
For me, it's been boarding school. So my
Okay.
dad made an informed decision when I was in ninth grade, or I was in eighth grade basically when I went to boarding school for the first time, to send me to boarding
Uh-huh.
school. Um, so like my dad loves spending time with me. Like he would spend time with me. So with my mom, they would spend time with me over anything. But for them to send me to a boarding school was a big thing as well. But he did make that decision, and for me, I've always had this outlook that whatever happens in your life is for your own good. So if I am somewhere, if I am in, like, for example, a boarding school, I have a purpose over there. And my job is to make sure that I fulfill that purpose. Even if I don't know it, is to figure it out and fulfill that purpose. So going to boarding school in eighth grade as well, a lot of students might say that, oh, it's a very big thing. You feel lonely. I've honestly never cried for going back home because I've never ever felt lonely. People say boarding school is where all brats are sent, or let's say, like, undisciplined children. But that's not the case, because a lot of friends that I met in boarding school, I can call them my lifelong friends from right now itself, because you meet a lot of people from different backgrounds from all over the country. You learn a lot about how people manage situations. And being in a boarding school, even though, like, you're not that far away, like it's only 400, 500 kilometers away from your family, you still learn how to take up situations yourself and figure it out yourself because you're alone. Basically, you're staying on your own. So you learn how to clean your utensils. If you're cooking food yourself, you learn how to make food yourself. That's the biggest thing. For us, we lived on like ramen and a lot of noodles and stuff like that as well. But then eventually we did learn how to cook food, cleaning our rooms, making sure everything's tidy, arranging our cupboards, folding our blankets, fixing our bed sheets. So there's a lot to learn as well. Taking care of yourself, eating proper meals at proper times. That's the biggest takeaway that I had in boarding school. That being in boarding school, it'd be like, okay, I'll eat whatever I want, but no, you eat whatever the school gives you. You eat it with a smiley face, you eat it happily, and you make sure you get enough amount of food in the body as well. You take care of yourself because once you're at home, your parents are basically doing everything for you.
Yes.
They're feeding
Yeah.
you, they're taking care of your room.
Oh my God. I got 2 kids. They should hear this.
So,
but you're 100% right. I mean, but I think that's an experience, I think, that has already given you a leg up, because coming to a different country, the way you've adjusted, and you're getting into a profession that has very little predictability.
yeah,
Day to day, and even systemic. Like, you never know what the next innovation is going to be that'll revolutionize medicine.
for
And I
sure.
think medicine tends to be a little more susceptible to revolutionary changes,
Yeah,
unlike, say, accounting. I'm an
yeah,
accountant by trade. There's no major crazy
uh,
invention that's going to happen that's going to revolutionize my industry. There might be an invention with AI that makes accountants obsolete, but other than that, I don't necessarily see any earth-shattering changes dramatically. Whereas
yeah,
in medicine, it's literally, even the pandemic. With the pandemic, we saw a different face of medicine with more telemedicine, and more situations like that. So that's pretty awesome. So I think you definitely have an advantage by going to boarding school. But one thing I want to talk about is, what are your goals? What's your ambition? Where do you want to really end up in the world? Because obviously you're from India, you came to the Caribbean.
yeah.
How are you thinking this? 8 years down the road, where would you want to see yourself?
Honestly, I have a lot of family in the States who are doctors and they run
Okay.
their own hospitals or clinics. So
Okay.
looking at them, that did make me think that down in the future, I do want to open up either a clinic or a hospital and my
Okay.
own personal business in that way, so that I
Perfect.
get to work in my own hours and I can spend
Yeah.
time with my family at the moment at that time as well. However, if I be honest, I had this like when I was in fourth, fifth grade, I thought I'll be a neurosurgeon and stuff like that. I had this ambition, but then when I think about it right now, I do have an ambition of being a neurosurgeon, but obviously after you do your clinical rotations, you get to know what you're best at. So for me right now, I'll take it step by step. I'll complete pre-med, I'll complete MD, I'll get into my rotations after like completing step one. And then after my rotations, I would see what best suits me. Because having an ambition is one thing on the side, but then having whatever you're best at is the other thing on the side as well.
Right. Absolutely. So, neurosurgeon and things like that tend to be the most quote unquote sexy portions, but I will are sexy professions for
Yeah,
amongst medicine. But within medicine, there's just so many.
of course.
For example, again, I mean, as you go through your rotations and as you go through your education and grow in your career, you will see this, that, for example, the simplest business model that a physician can potentially use to start their own business is essentially primary care.
Yeah,
Whether it's primary care clinics, whether it's internal medicine clinics, and these obviously eventually lead into more specialized care. So, from from a business standpoint, you actually might be doing more business as a primary care physician, because if someone has a cold, cough, sprained finger, they're coming to you. If you're a neurosurgeon, you're only getting to see a patient if and only if they have something that's relevant to you. You're not seeing somebody for colds and coughs and things like that. So I do think in the longer run, more complicated and tough specialties, I feel like it becomes harder to start your own business in the relevant field of practice. So, for example, most neurosurgeons would end up with a hospital. And yes, I'm not saying that they cannot make money. They might have profit sharing agreements, what have you, with the hospitals. But my point is that I think if business is an aspect that you're really focused on, which it seems like you seem like a very, very astute young man, internal medicine or family medicine may not necessarily be a bad choice, because then you can have your business. You're not dealing with extremely acute situations. You have a little more work-life balance. But you also mentioned the United States. One thing that I wanted to talk to you about, and just let our audiences know, is inform them about the CARICOM region and the CARICOM markets, generally speaking. So, for example, the CARICOM is an organization of the 23 Caribbean countries, which also include Suriname and Guyana. These are not a part of the Caribbean, they're part of South America, but they still are associated with it. There are other Eastern Caribbean islands that aren't a part of the CARICOM, like you have St. Martin, Cayman Islands. A lot of these are either protectorates or, things like that. Some of these, and the entire CARICOM region and the Eastern Caribbean region, you're looking at about 5 to 6 million people. So it's a big market. So from our research, what we found out is that, for example, the licensing process and becoming a physician process works very, very similar to India or Europe. You finish your, straight out of high school, you go into a pre-med program and an MD program, you finish the whole program, and then you apply for an internship as soon as you're done. The only thing is that the state and the country have to recognize your accreditation. So in our situation, since we are accredited right throughout the Caribbean, you should not have a problem. You get a job, you work for 2 years. It's a 2-year internship. Specifically in St. Vincent, it's an 18-month internship. So you work as a junior doctor for 18 months, or what we would call an internship in India. And then eventually you take the CAM-C test, which is very similar to, it's a licensing test. It is very similar to the PLAB. And you take the CAM-C and complete the CAM-C. I think that there might be 2 parts to the CAM-C. And then eventually you get your license. And then you become a licensed physician with mobility across 23 countries. The 23 countries include Jamaica, Trinidad, Antigua, St. Lucia, some of these really big islands. And St. Lucia is literally a hop, skip, and jump away from you. It's 45 minutes by a boat for you. But what happens is at that point, you become a licensed physician. Interestingly, we were looking at, okay, so, maybe it's not, students will do better if they go back to India. But the fact of the matter is, when you actually assessed how the students do after finishing their internship, with about 3 to 4 years of experience of working within the same geography, say, for example, in Jamaica, the average physician supposedly makes about $100,000 with about 3 to 4 years of post. So basically, you spend 5 years to finish your MD, and then you work 2 years for your junior doctor training, and then 3 years as a licensed physician. So in about 10 years, you are going to be making, within the Caribbean, 100,000 at least. So Jamaica, Trinidad, very comparable, even within. Yeah, and mind you, I would like to point out that this is significantly more than what Indian physicians make.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, I'm not talking about physicians who have their own practice. That's a different story. They're business owners. They're not physicians. But I'm talking about somebody who is employed by a hospital, or is a hospitalist within a hospital group. So within the CARICOM region, you have some really big economies like Jamaica. You have Trinidad. You have Barbados. You have St. Lucia. I think these are the 4 largest. And even Suriname. Suriname, there's a language barrier. But the interesting thing with Suriname is that they speak Hindi.
They speak Dutch and Hindi.
So the local language, well, if their local language, so you can understand everything that they say. Yeah. They have some Dutch words peppered in their local dialect, but it's, I would say, 80 to 90% Hindi. Yeah, so it's pretty cool. And then you have Guyana, which is a very big country as well. Guyana and Suriname are poised to do really big things because they found a lot of oil in both of these geographies. So by the time you're probably practicing and well established, in your profession, I do think that the shape of CARICOM and the contribution of CARICOM globally will be dramatically different and better. And that's something that I think a lot of Indian students, because my experience with Indian students and or the average Indian student is that they don't really know where the Caribbean is.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean,
So-
yeah, go ahead.
For us, the Caribbean is basically like West Indies, the cricket team.
Yeah.
That's all we
Yes.
know. And one notable figure
But-
is Chris Gayle. So that's all Indians know about. So if you say the Caribbean, they're like, huh?
Yeah.
So
But at least the West Indies is a good correlation to have. I mean, I've met a lot
Yeah.
of folks who've come and told me that, oh yeah, this is, I mean, it's by Africa, right? I was like, no, not at all. Like, you're
Yeah.
completely off by a couple of continents. So I do think, but again, I mean, now that we did talk about the career prospects in the CARICOM region, and again, just like almost every other growing economy in the world, the CARICOM also has a shortage of physicians, and they want physicians, and they will. And the best part is, I don't know if you've noticed, the general diaspora, employed diaspora within these Caribbean regions is very, very diverse. You'll find people from Europe. You'll find
Yeah.
people from India. You'll find people from the USA. You'll find people from South America. You'll find people from Australia.
East Asia
Even
as well.
they're
Yeah.
all there. So they are very welcoming. Their immigration process is very, as long as you have a job and are not staying illegally, they're willing to work with you no matter what. Like even the Vincentian government, when the Ukraine situation happened, any Ukrainians that were there who couldn't get their passports renewed or any situation like that, they granted them like an asylum kind of a situation where they don't have to go back. They're not going out. Like, it's not like their bank accounts are becoming void because their passports expired. The government really, really bends over backwards to try to improve and help international folks. And I really appreciate that about the Caribbean. But one thing I know, when we were talking briefly, you actually said that coming to the Caribbean had a bigger advantage for you than India.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
So I'll openly tell you about the whole system of medicine in India. We have one examination after 12th grade, which is a NEET, basically. And that's basically for medicine. If you want to apply to medical school, you have to give the NEET after your 12th grade. Preparations start from 9th to 10th grade. Basically, you have coaching centers where they teach you based on those courses. So there are notable coaching centers that do that. At least 100,000, 200,000 students apply in 1 year, and you have a set amount of seats per university. So first of all, starting from 9th grade, the coaching fees for every student is $10,000 a year, basically.
What? Just for coaching?
Just for coaching for the whole. So that's how they earn a lot of money. So
Wow.
that's from 9th to 12th grade that you're paying that some amount of money. After which you do give the exam. Now there are two quotas. One quota is a normal folk, which is the normal citizens of India, and one quota is for the people who are underprivileged. So
Okay.
what happens is that you're basically giving 4 years of your life for preparing for one exam, just to give a shot into getting into a government university in India for medicine, out of which 75% of the quota is given to the people who are above the poverty line, basically, and 25% for below the poverty line. Now, if you get a score that's similar to someone who's below the poverty line, he gets a seat or she gets a seat, and you won't get a seat, basically. So in India, if you get into medical school that's government based, that's how people assume it's the best way to get into medicine in India, and that is true. AIMS, one of the notable medicine university in India, has only 70 seats per year. So you're looking at 200,000 students applying. So that's 0.1%.
200,000 students. Yeah, oh man, and 74 seats.
Yeah, so it's a 0.1% chance for you to get in, basically. And after which, if you don't get in, you can still apply for. Yeah.
Let me ask you a quick question. So you talked about AIMS, but that's just one school. Can you tell me, like, for example, AIMS is in Delhi, right? And in Delhi, in the entire union territory of Delhi, how many total seats are there for all the universities? I just want to get an idea of, if you have 200,000 applicants per state, how many people are potentially getting it?
So
it can't be that many. I know these states don't have that many medical schools.
It differs from like state to state. So basically, I'm from Gujarat, so we tend to have higher seats because Gujarat's like, of course, compared to Delhi, which is a UT, it's way bigger than the UT, obviously. So you have more government universities. But then it also depends on the rankings and stuff like that. So some of them are, of course, medical colleges and stuff like that, but then there's no infrastructure there. There's no way of teaching. So going there, basically, you're going to end up at one of the hospitals and you might get a junior position and you're going to stay stuck with that for the rest of your life. So there's no growth.
Okay.
And when it comes to seats for the top medical colleges, let's say you're roughly around 1,000 or 1,200 in the whole country, basically.
All right. Well, I mean, yeah, but that's the other thing. India is the most populated country in the world. Through their own means, they are probably producing, I don't know what, 20,000, 25,000 physicians a year at most, including all the private schools and government schools, which is interesting because in the United States, there are 34 to 38,000 residency slots every year. USA has 1/3 the population and they're producing close to double physicians that India does, which is very interesting.
The thing is that it's also a lot of the culture part of it. So me personally, I've chosen to do medicine. But a lot of students from India, you can see that their background is basically they've been like, told by their parents, like, we want you to be a doctor, we want you to be an engineer or something like that. So if you look at it, there are a lump sum amount of students who want to do medicine from their heart. So they're going to find different ways to get into medicine. For example, for me, I didn't know the Caribbean was an option, but because I did research, I did end up over here. So that's something that I did on my own personal path. But if you look at other students, they're just doing it for the sake of doing it. So a lot of students who get seats as well. They, of course, they did put in the hard work, they did everything. But then if you ask them, do you actually want to be a doctor? They won't give you a viable answer for that. And again, the infrastructure in India is built in such a way that because of the amount of inflow of students, these universities only have a set amount of seats available. And we don't have that many widespread universities with the same amount of infrastructure. Like if you compare AIMS to any other government medical college in India, you can't compare them because AIMS is on another level. The amount of infrastructure it has, you can compare it to a US medical school as well because that's the amount of infrastructure that they have. So the influence,
right? But AIMS is also it's like Harvard. Now the question is, can you compare Harvard to AIMS? I don't know. I have no idea what AIMS is like.
So if you're going to compare Harvard Medical School and AIMS Medical School, there's a comparison for sure. But if you're going to compare Harvard as a whole and AIMS as a whole, you can't compare because obviously it's two different disciplinaries. Because AIMS is a medical college, Harvard's a whole university itself. So they have a lot more courses available.
I see. Awesome. And generally speaking, and I know this might be a very, very precocious or premature question for you. I know it's only been 4 months that you've been at St. James. When you look back at your decision, and quite evidently it sounds like there were opportunities for you to continue your education in India, but you chose to not do that there because you felt like your prospects would be better in the Caribbean. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
So I did plan on applying to India initially, but then I figured out this whole NEET situation, and private colleges in India, they're not worth it because you're supposed to give a lump sum amount of donations, which is basically the complete fees that I'm paying over here.
Wait, so your donation, is that not your tuition? Like they're expecting you to pay
donation is basically reserving a seat for yourself.
But that goes towards tuition?
No, that's a whole separate amount that you're giving.
Okay.
Your tuition fees, obviously, the tuition fee is not that high. It's mediocre. You
Okay.
can say it's like somewhere in the middle. But then the amount of the
Okay.
donation that you're giving for getting a seat, because the thing is that in India, there's a lot of things involved politically and stuff like that. You might know about it as well. If you're running a business in India, there's a lot of stuff running
Yeah.
politically. So you're supposed to cater to them as well. So looking at to
Right.
that, there's a certain procedure where you get seats by reserving them. Some universities, they do give it like, like you give this much amount of your donation will go for your fees and the rest we'll keep for ourselves to build infrastructure and stuff like that. Or else some of them do it like they just ask for a donation up front. You give the donation and then you pay the fee separately. So private medical schools in India, in my opinion, is a no-go. It's not worth it because there's no set system for it. There's a lot of issues that you face in a private medical college because there's no government involvement in it. The only government involvement is for them to pay taxes. So
Yeah.
there's no
Okay, I see
set
what you're
curriculum. They can teach you the way they want to, and you don't know what they're teaching you as well because they're giving you a curriculum. But how are you so sure that the curriculum is actually required for medicine? And if you go on
Right,
paper,
right,
and if
right.
I, for example, let's say if I show my certificate from a private medical college in India, it's not as worth it.
I see what you're saying. Interesting. So it sounds like that this fee in India is entirely off the books. It's, you have that, and then on top of that, you have to pay your tuition. And then from conversation with you, it almost sounds like there's no quality standards for these private schools. Like you might have a private school that's probably equivalent to AIMS, but then you might have some private schools that have no standard whatsoever, like you mentioned earlier. So keeping all of that in mind, it sounds like you made a cost-benefit analysis to come to the Caribbean. But
Yeah, and in the end, all of us are going to give the step one regardless. So
really,
it's also the time that plays an important role.
okay,
The amount of time I'm going to invest in India, if I invest over here, I get it done quickly. If like it's not easier. Nothing's easy. There's no shortcut in medicine, obviously.
right,
But then there's also a way to shorten things in a way that you work harder and you
absolutely,
reduce your time.
yeah,
So over here, it's a 5-year course for me basically because I'm doing pre-med as well.
right,
So it is 5 years, but then if I look at the States, if I did apply, I did apply to the States, but I didn't go over there as well. It's because it's 4 years of doing a
undergrad,
bachelor's in either biochem or like
yeah,
biology, for example, and then giving the MCAT and then getting into medical school. And
yes,
tuition over there obviously is like way high. It's like $90,000 to $100,000 for a student, so it's not worth it.
yeah. That 90 to 100,000 in some cases could go up per year. So, and this is
Yeah,
including bachelors, this is
yeah.
bachelors. So if you're out of state student,
So
it's not feasible. That makes
it's not
complete
worth it.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. But thank you so much for the lovely insight, Om. Your experiences and honestly, your perspective truly is unique. And I think that positivity and that can-do attitude, I personally think this is going to take you really, really far. So again, thank you so much for choosing St. James and helping us facilitate your dreams and taking the time to talk to us. If you liked today's content, if you liked today's podcast, please check us out on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Do give us a like and a follow.
Thank you so much for tuning into our show. We hope you enjoyed another episode of Med School Minutes. If you like our content, please follow us and receive notification when a new show is posted. This podcast is brought to you by St. James School of Medicine. For a video version of this podcast, please check us out on sjsm.org/video.